New York City. Los Angeles. Both are amazing cities. One of the most popular cities in the United States. There are a lot of good cities, but every city has their bad parts. The bad part being poverty and crime. Crime is a big issue, and it is still very much alive in both Los Angeles and New York. But the part of Los Angeles that's mostly known for being dangerous is the south part. Southern LA, also known as South Central. In the 1980s, there was a huge uprise in crime in both the south part of Los Angeles and New York City. But ever since the 1980s, cities in South Los Angeles became more widely known as being dangerous, more than New York City, leaving crime in New York overlooked. And New York was just as dangerous as southern Los Angeles. Crime in New York City increased after the cocaine epidemic, along with the other cities in America. The 1980s crack epidemic hit New York the hardest. The reason why it hit New York City the hardest was because out of all the other cities and states in America, the use of cocaine became more common and popular in New York City. It would soon lead to a larger increase of crime in New York City. The rates for murder largely increased and skyrocketed, along with arrests and drug raids, and a decrease in birth rates. African Americans were mostly targeted in crimes related to the crack epidemic because due to segregation, most African Americans in New York lived in low-income areas in the urban part of New York. And the use of cocaine was mostly common in the urban areas of New York. The rates of homicide and arrest that increased after the crack epidemic mostly consisted of African Americans. The 1980s became the worst decade for crime in New York City. In the same decade, the uprise in the crime of the cities of southern Los Angeles became way more known, even though New York City was the most dangerous city at the time. In Los Angeles, mostly African Americans lived in the southern part of Los Angeles. In the 1970s, there was a large rate of unemployment for African Americans, after jobs were mostly taken by immigrants, which led to a large increase in poverty. It would also start the formation of gangs, such as Bloods and Crips, which would later lead to a really large increase in crime in southern Los Angeles, along with the crack epidemic. New York City was still more dangerous at that time, but cities in Los Angeles became more widely known as dangerous places, such as Compton. One of the main reasons is gangster rap. It was a subgenre of rap introduced by NWA, a notorious rap group. In their music, they would talk about Compton and other cities in LA, which would be heard by almost everybody in America, making South Los Angeles way more wide known. After the 1990s, crime in New York City and South Los Angeles would soon drop. Compton was known as the most dangerous city in South Los Angeles. As of today, the crime rate is way lower than before. Same with New York City. But New York City's crime rate skyrocketed in 2020 after the pandemic. And that's why crime in New York should be known more widely than crime in Los Angeles.
Sorry.